Good morning, everybody. If you'd like to take your seats, we'll make a start. Thank you. Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is James Cummings. I'm a journalist with the Times of Malta, and I'd like to warmly welcome you all to the fourth of our business breakfasts here this morning, looking at environmental, social, and governance, or ESG. You'll hear that acronym a lot today, I think. Today's event is hosted by Times of Malta in collaboration with PKF, and is called Governance in Focus, Navigating ESG Challenges. Just a reminder that we are live on Facebook as well, so those of you at home are very welcome to take part. We do welcome questions and comments online as well. For those of you here with us today in St. Julian's, thank you for being here, and there are some QR codes on the tables which you can use for more information about this morning's event. We will shortly commence the first, this morning's panel discussion, but before we do, I'd like to welcome the first of our two opening speakers. Now, we were due to have Minister Stefan Drinzo-Atsapardi speaking this morning, but unfortunately the Minister is unwell and can't make it with us this morning. So we're very grateful to the following gentleman for stepping in to save the day. He's someone I've got to know, I guess, really through this series of events, and it's someone with a real wealth of knowledge on the topic. So please welcome to the stage to give his welcome address, Chairman of the ESG Alliance, Mr. David Schwirab.
Good morning. So I have been tasked to save the day, apparently. I'm not sure I'll be able to do that. First of all, thank you very much for all of you for being here. I must admit, I also need to thank Times of Malta and PKF for making this event a reality. As you know, the Malta ESG Alliance is an organization which brings together 13 founding partners, but of course the rest of well-meaning businesses will form part of that, with the plan of walking the talk, the ambition of mobilizing a transition into businesses that are driven by correct values. And the Times of Malta has really understood this mission, and this is the fourth event that has been organized with this intent. The first was an event which focused on ESG in general. I think that was a real good one. Then we started to focus. The second one was focusing on the E side, the environmental values that could drive transformation in business, but also in society and also international economy. The third was focused on S. Clearly, the fourth is now going to focus on G. I have a few notes that I prepared to get us to think a little bit about this, but G is a very important intro to the aspects of transformation. Some, quote unquote, believe that the best transformation into the qualitative business is driven by prioritization of governance. We will see through our panel what their views are on this, and we might be surprised that for most of us, whilst E seems to be the priority in what it is we do and the transformations we could bring about, because maybe it's easy to measure. However, G is the true gateway. Governance is the true gateway. We must remember that the whole world, but certainly Malta, will be going through unprecedented transformations of adaptation and growth. Transformations will be bigger than that of the Industrial Revolution of the 60s. Bigger. Try to imagine when farmers were working in their fields and were asked to move their way of life and their economies and their livelihoods to cities and to factories, industrial estates, supported by machines. Now, of course, the transition into an ESG world is a completely different one. It's actually the reverse. It's where we start focusing on the human and start dealing with development of value through respect of the humans. This is going to be a pivotal conversation about shaping our collective future. The word collective probably needs to be underlined and highlighted because of the collaborative nature with which the alliance works, but also the collaborative nature that would enable a transformation of an economy and business driven by ESG. And this will echo in the corridors of societal progress. It is G for some, maybe for some more than others, quote unquote, is considered to be the linchpin of the trinity of E, S, and G. And I think we must immediately clarify that what we mean by G is certainly not necessarily that which happens in the coffers of government, but also what happens at our levels, at our board levels, at management levels of our businesses, and certainly what we do on a personal basis, as parents, as guardians, as people of influence, and any areas in which we are able to bring about positive change. There are a number of foundations that we need to keep in mind, some key words which I would like to introduce, and then we move on from here. The first one is ethical foundations, ethics. It's a word we often use. Maybe not everybody quite understands the depth of the meaning and the importance of such a term. Ethics is brought about by parenting, by raising children, by education, children in schools and so on, but certainly through leadership in what it is we do in our businesses, in our society. The need for a long-term vision, why is that important? It provides stability, resilience, and allows businesses to stand the test of time. So having a long-term vision that is driven by changes of values that ensure that businesses stay around in the medium to long term is actually a good thing. So actually is good for business. Stakeholder collaboration. Collaboration. Collaboration is one word which we will use very often, I assume, this morning, to ensure that there is inclusion of not only of the people we employ, but also of customers, of shareholders, of employees, of talent, but also of all those people to come to our islands to share in the journey of transformation. Maybe this is not so obvious, but I certainly want to highlight the importance of innovation and governance. As we transcend a change in the way we do things, in the way we transform our businesses, in the way we transform the skills of our employees, the way we transform a national economy, that is going to require innovation. It will not happen with the tools we know. It will not happen with the tools we have been using. It will happen with tools and with foresight of the things that we probably will be faced with. So being aware of this and being sensitive to it is going to be rather important. And finally, but not least, resource responsibility. And when we talk about resources, it's not just about the materials we use, the products we engage, the products we put on the market and possibly sell, but certainly the employees and the talent and the skills that we endow them with and we support them with. So this brings about, after all, environmental stewardship as we do that. So I look forward to the conversation this morning. I will eventually join our distinguished panel later on this morning to ask them and challenge them in the subject matter and maybe dive deeper in all of these aspects of the subject matter. Let us allow ourselves this morning to consider how G in ESG could become the bedrock of a future where prosperity, sustainability, and wellness intertwine. If we try to get that, if we try to detail that this morning, I think we will leave as people who would have are better people, understand the subject matter, and potentially be able to influence a bit more effectively. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, David, thank you. I would now like to introduce our second speaker this morning, who I understand has come all the way from Portugal to speak with us. So please do give a very warm welcome to PKF partner, Sofia Moreno. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here, and thank you very much to PKF for inviting me to be here, particularly Mr. George Mangione. Thank you very much. It's a privilege for me to come from Portugal to Malta to be here talking about sustainability. And I have been a really good welcoming in Malta. I feel myself at home. Thank you to all the team for the invitation, and thank you to Times of Malta too. So sustainability, it's a charming word. It's a word that is now on our agenda. It's not a new word. It's not a new subject, but it's a subject that companies cannot avoid now. I bring a small presentation to follow this dialogue between us, and I divided this presentation in 3 different subjects: standards and frameworks, value chain involvement, and communication and transparency. Okay, so we all want to live in a better world, and sustainability can give us this better world, because this involvement with the community, with the companies, with the public sector, with all the value chain, can improve our life being, can improve our world, and can give to the new generations not the answer to all the problems, but can give the new generations the opportunity of being in a better world. ESG, a better world in environmental, in social, and in governance. We are today here to talk a little bit more about governance, about the policies, the way of being, the ethic and conduct codes to the companies to the whole value chain. And with our internal policies, we can have internal procedures and a culture that is fairer and more balanced, with everyone's responsibility, people, public and private institutions. One of the biggest challenges for the companies is where to start. How can we start? Which standards can we follow? Which regulation can we use? So we can split these general frameworks and these regulation and standards into 3 different types. I'm not seeing the screen, but I believe that you are seeing a circle with different types that are mandatory, voluntary, and required by stakeholders. So these different types are used in European Union, are used in Malta, are used in Portugal, where I come from, are used in USA, depending on the country, on the geography. We can use different regulation or different tendency or different standards. But I believe that in some way the main guide is determined, the main requirement is defined from the client, from the customer, the final customer, from the investor, from different stakeholders. So, if we talk in mandatory frameworks, here in European Union, we have the new CSRD. CSRD is CSRD, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. It's a directive that in fact started in 2014. the destination were the public interested companies with an average of more than 500 employees that needs to submit and report the non-financial information. And what is non-financial information? Environment, social, and governance information. And on that time, the regulation doesn't define what kind of information about environment or about social companies should report. Companies need to decide what materiality topics they need to report. And we started all around the world to see that companies define as materiality topics the energy efficiency, the carbon footprint, for example, equality between men and women, the average between the salary in the company and the salary in the country or in the region, so different materiality topics. We have a standard now, it's called GRI, Global Reporting Initiative. The last version is from 2021, but we have very good works done under the version of 2016, for example. And the GRI was one framework, not mandatory, voluntary, but a really good starting point to do and to report ESG subjects. And the GRI, it's now, the methodology used by GRI, it's now used to, for a FRAG, that I will explain a little bit more in the front. The GRI is the basis for the reports, how we have the reports today. So the GRI is divided in 4 series, general series that is related with general data from the companies, number of employees, the geographies where the company is, the sector, the main projects, and 3 other series, in environment, economical, non-finance, and social. And the GRI defines methodologies and calculations for the report of each material topic. Today, with the CSRD, we have the definition of materiality, but in other sides, not only for non-financial, and that is the point. The CSRD is this new regulation framework that needs to be transposed to the national framework until June of the next year. It obliges companies to report according to 12 standards published by EFRAG, and EFRAG is formally committed with GRI. And these 12 standards defines exactly what kind of information companies should report, and defines an interesting concept about double materiality. So if in the past we have the concept of materiality to report ESG, for now we have the double materiality. We cannot use information to do social washing or greenwashing. We need to use a good argument to report non-financial data, and that argument is related with financial information, with accounts. So double materiality, as we have this new concept. The ESG materiality topics are that have impact on accounts, impact on finance, impact on the invoice, impact on the results, on the financial results, and impact on society, on people, human resources, families, and all the value chain. So this is the news about regulation. I have these general frameworks in the presentation too, GRI standards, that when we decide to report, to do a sustainability report or to report information about governance, about environment, about social subjects, we can use we can use the mandatory regulation, of course, but we can go a step ahead and use other general frameworks that sometimes are requirements from our investors or our clients. For example, we can have an investor that asks for a reporting according ICMA. And what is ICMA? International Market Capital Association. So we can have someone who wants to invest in green bonds, link bonds, sustainability bonds, or blue bonds, and we need to report according ICMA. And after to report, we need to ask to someone, I suggest PKF Malta, to do an external audit, an external verification according to the ICMA principles. In this external verification have an output that is a declaration, a conformity declaration according to ICMA principles. We have accountability AA 1000, is there 100, but is missing 10, is 1000. ISO 26000, that is a social responsibility management system. Social accountability 8000, it's another social responsibility management system, very related with the human rights, and the output of this standard, social accountability 8000, is one certification. ISO 14001, that is environmental management system. GHG protocol, that is a framework to calculate carbon footprint. ISO 40064. So we have a very big range of standards and guidelines that we can use, and some of the challenge of the companies usually are where to work, so where to start. So now I think that the better way to start is to follow the CSRD here in Europe, of course, and link that with GRI, for example, but of course that it will it depends on the customers and investors' requirements. So the CSRD establishes strict requirements and represents a significant advance in terms of sustainability. For now, the companies that have an annual average of 500 employees were already subject to reporting non-financial data. But in the future, it will be different. So from January 1st on 26, large companies or parent companies of a large group which meet two of the following criteria needs to report non-financial data, and there are a new information. This reporting, this sustainability report needs to be audited. So we will have a different way of report the non-financial data, because when we say that it needs to be audit, the audit, it's similar, and the methodology of audits, it's very close to the methodology of financial information. It's based on verification of sources, interviews, recalculation, for example. We used to, for example, a company that presents the GHG, the carbon footprint calculation according to GHG protocol, the way we do the audit is to recalculate the GHG, the information about GHG, and interview people and ask for sources, and we look for the origin documents that gave some input to that calculations. And we keep going on 27, the small and medium companies listed on regulated markets should report too, and the total balance is 4,000 million, turnover 8, average number of workers 50. So it's a very more large number of companies that will need to report. And okay, we are in the end of 23. In January 27, the companies that need to report, it's related to the information of the year of 26. So in 24 months, more or less, we need to have small and medium companies listed on regulated markets, reporting according to the CSRD. Of course, that until there, we will have new information, new regulation, and new details about how to report and how to audit too. So, this sustainability information, it's important. I am here talking about ESG. I know that the focus is much more governance, but I think that this information is important. One new about this CSRD and this regulation and the tendency around the world is to involve all the value chain. It's not enough to invest in sustainability. The concept needs to be integrated through the value chain. We have increasingly informed and concerned consumers, and we don't want our products to cause us reputational damage. So if we have a conduct code or an ethic code, we should present that code to our suppliers, for example. They should sign as known about that, and we can audit our suppliers to know if they are according to our conduct or ethic code. And we can ask for declarations, we have much more involvement of all the people and all the companies in all the value chain. Because we have consumers, clients, and investors that want to know what is the origin, for example, of the raw materials, how the human resources were involved, if that raw materials are coming from countries or from industries that doesn't respect human rights or children's rights, for example. So we need to be much more active on that. So G defines the company's actions in favor of transparency, risk management, and control. We need to have leaders managing human, material, and financial resources. And after that, we have the communication and transparency. And when we communicate non-financial information, governance, environment, and social, we should not communicate just for do it. We should avoid any greenwashing, any social washing. It's not important, for example, to communicate a voluntary action isolated in 1 year that doesn't have any impact on the financial information. We should act in transparency way, and we should know how to report and why are we reporting. And I leave these final questions. Are companies knowing how to report? Are companies reporting the right information? Are companies reporting relevant material, accounting-related data on time? It is possible to quantify sustainability, and I answered this one, yes it is. Should sustainability reports be easy to read? And it is possible to audit sustainability reports, and I can answer this one, yes it is. How should companies get prepared? So these questions are for reflection too. I hope my presentation can help you in this subject about non-financial data, about sustainability reports, even the concept and the words that we use to sustainability are lots. On the new CSRD, we have a small explanation about this. For now, it's data, or sustainability data. It's not CSR, it's not corporate sustainability, it's not non-financial, it's sustainability data. So, hope my presentation was clear. My big challenge for being here is to speak in English. It's my hope it was understandable. And I'm available for any question in the final, of course. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Sophia. Thanks. So, as I mentioned earlier, this is the fourth of our business breakfast discussing ESG. Now, this is something which, I mean, I've kind of even seen it in my work as a journalist, that this is becoming increasingly relevant, particularly with things like climate change and social justice becoming sort of increasingly to the foreground. These issues and others have led organizations to really, I think, examine, you know, the impact of their activities and also how they operate. And ESG is seen as something that's very vital in helping address these. This morning, as David said, we'll be focusing on governance and its very kind of vital role. And if you talk to people in ESG, which I've done through this series of events, a lot of them will tell you, in many ways, it's kind of almost the most important of the three. So hopefully there'll be lots of interesting and useful information this morning. I know, today's discussion will examine a range of topics in particular. I think this is in the program. It's going to include things like innovation, long-term planning, responsibility, collaboration, and ethics. So we've got quite a lot to get through. But I'm sure our fantastic panel will be able to tell us much more about these and their relevance for personal well-being, sustainability, and economic success. So I think the stage moves behind me have been done, which is good news. One last thing before we start the panel, we will be holding a Q&A afterwards as well. So if there's anything you'd like to raise or maybe sort of contribute, keep that in mind for then. Before we do start, regrettably, Michael Warrington from AX Group, who's in the program, isn't able to join us this morning. So our thanks go to Martijn Svelle for stepping in his place. So I think we can make a start with the panel, if everyone's here. Please welcome to the stage CEO of the Malta Maritime Forum, Kevin J. Borge, PG Group CEO, Charles Borge, AX Group's Chief Technology Officer, Martijn Svelle, Valletta Cruiseport CEO, Steven Schwereb, Chief Officer for Policy and International Affairs at the Malta Gaming Authority, Warda Kinga, and returning to the stage to host this morning's discussion, David Schwereb, Chairman of the Malta ESG Alliance. Thank you.
So, good morning to everybody. Is this working? Yeah. Good morning. Thank you for the intro, James. Thank you for the keynote this morning. That was very good, very insightful, very informative, very technical. I have the pleasure now to be accompanied by people I respect a lot, all of them, very good friends of mine, who I have had the pleasure and the honor to discuss this subject on a number of occasions in different fora, and it's good to have us all together now focus exactly on this matter. You might have noticed that in my intro this morning I was quoting and unquoting the importance of G as an intro to any realistic transformation in business or an economy, and G is the absolute #1 gateway into that. In my mind, I had nobody else except for Charles. Charles I have had the pleasure to know for quite a couple of times. Of course, you know Charles as being the CEO of PG with business experience in retail, in construction, in accommodation, in banking, of course. We know you there too. God knows what else. So a ton of experience coming back to this. And despite all of those varied experience, Charles seems to be, to me, the ambassador of the entry gate of G into a transformation of business driven by values ESG. So why is that, Charles? Why are you so passionate about it?
David keeps on embarrassing me. Irrespective of what I tell him, he keeps on embarrassing me every time. First of all, thank you very much, David, for inviting me to participate. But the thing is, I firmly believe that ESG in itself is a journey. It's not the end, be all and end all. But it's a journey. It's a series of decisions that corporates need to take going forward in order to be sustainable and in order to be meaningful in whichever industry and sector they are. However, the foundation, in my mind, is the G. We have spent a lot of time, effort, discussions on the E, on the environment, rightly so, on the social, rightly so, because obviously being a corporate citizen, you need to contribute back to society, part of the earnings, part of the profitability that you have to contribute some of it back into society, you have to treat your employees, your customers well. But unless you have a culture within the organization that permeates along the whole organization and makes sure that people understand the importance of governance in anything that they do, I don't think the E and the S will be successful. So in my mind, unless you have a very strong foundation, you cannot build the E and the S on top of that. And we have a lot of experiences, and we had a lot of examples to this. So I think what is G? What is governance? Because governance, after all, is not a word. It's not a simple word. It's all about having the right skills and competencies within the organization, both at board level, at the management level, making sure that the board does the proper oversight and the proper stewardship towards making sure that the risk parameters are met in order to make sure that the targets are met. The most recent efforts that are being undertaken in terms of the G is to make sure that there is sustainability. And sustainability, in my mind, means that you're here today and you're here tomorrow and you're here the day after. And in order, because after all, what is our objective as corporates, as organizations? We are here to improve shareholder value. The shareholder invested 100,000, and in a year's time, he expects that value to increase. So that is our objective. And unless our governance is structured in a proper way, the board exercises proper oversight. They have the necessary skills and competencies. Because it's amazing. Sometimes you find a board composed of just family members, not necessarily having the right skills and competencies. So it's critically important that the composition of the board, having the right skills and competencies, making sure that the oversight function on management is there, and making sure that the risks are being covered. And one of the major risks that we have nowadays, and it came out very clearly in the latest communication of the World Economic Forum, is the cybersecurity, it's the cyber risk. We need to make sure, every company needs to make sure that it has proper security measures against cyber risk. And this is coming out of the World Economic Forum, so I'm not reinventing anything. Making sure that there's business continuity, making sure that there is disaster recovery measures are in place. So that is the reason, David, what I've always said, and I will continue to insist, that the G, if you have a foundation, if you have the governance in place, making sure that you are in line with the rules and regulations, making sure that there's transparency, there's necessary reporting. You know, I remember earlier in my career when I was still a banker, we had a joint venture with Rothschilds. Rothschilds, very famous UK bank. Some of you remember because I see some familiar faces who were working with me at the time. And from Rothschilds, I got a lot of experience, obviously, in governance. And they used to tell me, listen, Charles, I don't want to know what's in the papers you've presented to the board. I want to know what's behind the papers, what you're not telling us. And my reply used to be, listen, Mr. So-and-so, what there is in the operation is in the papers. There's nothing more. And I honestly believe that having the proper structure, a governance structure, having the proper reporting, being accountable for the good and the bad. You know, as I said, ESG is a journey. Being accountable is critically important in order to have sustainable growth in the operation, in the business, having the right business model, and I can give you multiple examples. When I was researching a little bit, I found multiple examples of why companies fail, and some of them very clearly are down to lack of governance. And therefore, if that foundation is strong, then you can build the proper E and the proper S on top of the G.
Thank you for that very good introduction. You used maybe I'll use this intro to focus on a word that you use, which is the word sustainability, which gets people to cringe nowadays. You know, I remember 5 years ago, 8 years ago, people used to be excited when they heard the word sustainability. Now, it's so overused that we don't quite understand what it means, except that maybe we think about saving polar bears in Alaska in one way or another, which is rather irrelevant to us. Relevant to the world, of course, but less relevant to us. And you talked about sustainability of business, so making sure that the business is able to grow, be relevant, and grow market share, profits, and everything else that shareholders expect in the medium to long term. And that is true sustainability. So ESG and G actually makes business sense. Stephen, turning to you then. You, of course, are a CEO of a very, very large, very important organization, reporting to a board of multinationals because you have international shareholding as well. And of course, I guess that in your ability to carry on developing success, you must have realized that apart from running the business, doing business development and doing all the usual stuff, which is rather short term, you are clearly also focusing on the importance of having the right structures to report with and maybe be measured by in your role as CEO.
I'm CEO of Valletta Cruise Port, but as you know, I'm CEO of Global Ports Holding.
That too, my word.
Which is the largest cruise port operator in the world.
Absolutely.
So we operate 30 cruise ports in 17 different jurisdictions. So that gives me quite an oversight, and we're a London-listed entity where the governance aspect of it in a London-listed entity is quite onerous. I'd like to mention the 5 pillars of governance: accountability, responsibility, impartiality, fairness, and awareness. And I'll pick on the last one to support what Charles was saying. To have good governance, you have to be aware of what's happening around you in the changing environment, what the company needs, what the employees' needs are, what your stakeholders' needs are. You're servicing an industry, in our case, the cruise industry, where it's very visible, even though very small when compared to the world tourism sector. The tourism sector still accounts for just 1.5% of the world tourism market, but very highly visible. We're all the time facing challenges, environmental challenges, and this is where sustainability comes into play. We have to run a business with a long-term vision that can sustain all the challenges that we're facing. We're here discussing external forces as well. Look what happened to the cruise industry in Venice, for example. Overnight, it has been wiped out because of these external forces. I am aboard on the Venice terminal passenger. It's been quite a challenge. Some of it was self-inflicted as well, in the sense that there was self-regulation that has led then to knock-on effects that were irreversible. So when you're planning ahead your company trajectory, you need to cater for all the challenges, which is not easy. But that's why I picked on the word awareness and being aware of what's happening both internally and externally.
Absolutely, great insights. Must be really interesting to see the conversations around the Venice story, what led to what was a thriving business interest to that region and the economy down to what it is today.
Which is affecting all the Adriatic region now.
There goes. So we really need to take this seriously. Otherwise, livelihoods and quality of life and business continuity risk, therefore, because after all, this is management of risk is so important. I was thinking maybe the best segue would be Kevin. Kevin, about a month ago, was it, Kevin? You raised the point at MCSD about the issue of governance and transition and how the trading scheme, the environmental trading scheme, which is a good thing as part of the green transition of Europe, is influencing businesses in general, but also influencing the organization you lead, which is the Malta Maritime Forum. And therefore, maybe if you could take us a bit through that story, because I know it was also of interest to the Times of Malta as of late in their journalistic work. James, you are leading that. But also to take us through on what governance could bring to the table in addressing that risk in good time, in collaboration, not just at the business level, but also at governance level, potentially even at European level. Kevin.
Thank you, David. So good morning to everybody. And David, thank you for the question, although I will have to depart slightly from the G for the time being and then try and link it back to the subject of the story. So basically, in terms of the environmental sustainability and climate change objectives of the European Union, we are facing next year a tax, let's call it a tax, although just to start with my first reference to the G, here we are camouflaging the word tax, obviously because of the legislative process, it was made easier for the European Union not to call it a tax, because otherwise it would be subject to the vetoes of the member states. So they are calling them credits, they are calling them emission unit allowances. So basically a ship, when it travels from outside the European Union into the European Union, it has to pay 50% equivalent of the carbon that it generates under sail. And if it sails between an EU port and another EU port, it has to pay 100%. So the problem here is that when a ship sails from Singapore to Marsa-Shlock for transshipment purposes, and then onward from Marsa-Shlock to United States, to New York, it will have to pay 50% on the first leg into Marsa-Shlock, so from Asia, and then another 50% from Marsa-Shlock to New York. And this particular journey will cost the shipping line per year somewhere in the region of 24 million. You will appreciate that each shipping line will have numerous sailings, services, so the 24 million times 10 services is 240 million. And the Malta Maritime Forum, together with other European national clusters, basically from 7 countries, we have been grouping together to try and instill some sense into the drafters of this directive, and this has been going on for quite a few months now. Because what's going to happen is two things, business leakage and carbon leakage. Business leakage is because if the ship does not enter into Marsash Lock on its way from Singapore, but it calls in Egypt or it calls in any other transshipment terminal in North Africa, and there are 8 transshipment terminals being built as we speak. So for that sale, it will pay nothing because they are not going to touch any EU territory. And then when they sail from, let's say, Tangier Med or from Port Said in Egypt onwards towards New York, they pay nothing again because they are not touching any EU port. What's going to happen is that Malta will lose its connectivity because in the Malta Freeport, we transship around 3 million TEUs, 20 equivalent units per year. Out of those 3 million, only 130,000 are for the Malta market. So our manufacturing primarily, but not only, manufacturing industry, but import and logistics industry as well, benefits from the critical mass we have through this 3 million transshipment volume every year, and that is going to be lost. What's going to happen is that our containers will be transshipped somewhere in Egypt or somewhere in North Africa, and then they will have to sail into Malta with feeder vessels, which are smaller vessels and do not fall under the scope of ETS. I have to be careful between my ETS and my ESG this morning.
Please no ECG.
Yes.
Please.
So what's going to happen is that there's going to be a loss of connectivity. There are going to be many regions in the European Union that are going to be hit by loss of connectivity. There's going to be economic loss. And ironically, there's going to be more pollution, at least in the Mediterranean. This is because when a ship sails from, now we're going through the Suez Canal and towards the Straits of Gibraltar, Malta is on the most efficient line there. If you veer downwards, southwards, you are generating more carbon because you are sailing a longer way, and if you try to do it in the same period of time, you're going to increase your power and you're going to generate more cargo. Plus the extra feeder vessel.
So Kevin, this is a clear issue for the Mediterranean ports, certainly Malta.
Yes.
The question is, could governance at any level, all levels, European, national, business, forum level, foundation level, could there have been a better sense of anticipation, of organization, of preparation?
Yes. It's unfortunate that we are very late in the day. We are very late in the day, and I would say that I think it is, part of it is a lack of transparency, and this is the G, which was adopted in the consultation leading up to this very important directive. But part of it is perhaps lack of resources in Malta. But I have to say that a month ago, a very strong letter which I have seen was sent from 7 countries, 7 ministers of Italy, Spain, Portugal, Greece, Cyprus, Malta, and Croatia, who are all in the same situation. And as this issue was missed in a small country like Malta, perhaps, but I'm sure that there must have been some deficiencies in the governance of this all, because big countries like Spain, big countries like Italy, who are going to be really, really hit. Spain has a very big terminal in Algeciras in the south of Spain, and Italy in Gioia Tauro. And somehow we are here.
So actually what's ironic in what you're saying is that whilst clearly the E side of ESG was the main motivator, the prime mover, and frankly maybe cannot be criticized because it's actually a good thing. However, because of the lack of engagement with the preparation of transition, of communication, of transparency, like you put it, therefore we could potentially spoil the party even in the E side.
Yes, because all countries...
Yes.
NDS, of course.
Loss of jobs.
Absolutely, loss of jobs.
Higher cost of living.
Absolutely. So that's why ESG is such an important term that needs to be tallied together. But here we're seeing
the
lack
issue,
of G
yes, is that this was sold very much with the E in mind, and with the E and the climate change and the temperature control, and that is what politically scored the points. But when they came down to the implementation mechanisms, it didn't filter down well. In the clear way that Charles was explaining, that your values and your objectives need to filter down until they are actually workable. And in this case, clearly they are not.
Which then brings me on to the other responsibilities I have with a different hat in that of MCSD and engagement of social partners to ensure that we are, first of all, prioritizing our engagement, ensuring that we know what's coming on to us, and able to react, not to resist, but to react in a manner that allows us to prepare the management of risk, because risk in a transition there will always be. There's no transition that doesn't come with pain and groans and names and injury. However, if well communicated through social dialogue, because that's probably the wider term that one should use, then there will be an opportunity to transition into a stronger economic
if I may just close on this. So, David, this was a very good initiative for us to discuss at MCSD, because it opened the awareness to all the social partners and for them to engage with their European networks and obviously bring this message, at least on behalf only of Malta at this point, to the powers that be.
Thanks, Kev. Martez, so you're another courageous one, apart from me this morning, for replacing Michael as CEO is unwell. But Martez, I have known also for a long time, and I also know you in this space, so you are right up there. Clearly, AX and the organization you represent, also a founding partner of the Malta ESG Alliance, comes with an interesting plethora of business interests, from construction to hospitality to care and whatever else you probably are in at the moment. Those are the ones I can remember now. Where managing all of these moving parts is a challenge in itself. However, as I know, I have understood Michael speaking to me in preparation to this meeting, and I'm sure we'll hear from you, brings about the need to appreciate risk in every sector, understand that risk, measure it, and account for it in a manner which is meaningful, measurable, and with accountability to shareholders, to board, to talent, and so on. Can you take us to the complex nature with which you try to do this?
Yes. So, good morning, everyone. I'm filling in big shoes. Hopefully, I do him justice. Yes. So, even I agree with you, but this morning we heard a lot the word framework. And coming from an IT background, I love the word framework because it sets the tone. So although we operate a diversity of businesses, once you set the framework in place, so the method how you are going to assess risks, the method how you are going to mitigate those risks, once you set that framework, whether you apply it to construction or you apply it to healthcare or you apply it to any other business, the risks will be different, but the method, the framework that you use is the same. We operate a number of, I'm sure Michael discussed this with you in the past as well, and also publicly, the way we are trying to ensure that the framework is adhered to, that there's transparency and the reporting is actually coming up to, to a board level, is through a number of committees. So we operate a number of committees, whether it's remuneration committee, audit committees, which are the standard ones, but also at an operational level. So we have an IT steering committee, for example, which I form part of, and I report to. ESG committee, so there are a number of these. I see them as a useful tool. So they're not, they're not a nuisance, like it's a compliance thing that I have to do or a report that I have to do because there's a steering committee. We're very active in our committees. So in my case, the IT steering committee, I use it as a platform for discussing progress on budget, again, linking to compliance. So if we have linking to governance. So if our method is to prepare a budget, our framework is to prepare a budget, get that budget approved by the board, and then roll out that budget. The fact that every month we are meeting and discussing the progress, if there's an issue with a vendor, with timing, with resources, it's flagged immediately. So you can take action straight away, rather than, waiting for the end of the year and then, and by the way, we had these issues. So that is our way of addressing the complexity of our business.
Thank you for that. I'm trying to imagine the detail with which you try to do this because of the diverse nature of your portfolio. And that is, but as you said, if you have the right spine, the right structure framework, like you mentioned, then it starts becoming more repeatable and less, and requires less innovation when you move from one action to another, or one economic activity to another. Thank you for that. We'll maybe detail it a little bit later. Kinga, so that brings me to you perfectly on cue, because you, of course, are representing the Malta Gaming Authority, and when we say that, normally some eyebrows are raised on how ESG and maybe the S, but certainly the G, could potentially be integrated through misconception, of course. I'm leading you with a question. It's not my opinion. To drive and direct a sustainable gaming industry. Now, this hall, and maybe the people following us on Facebook Live, might be having their own opinions about gaming and whether this is truly a sustainable economic activity because of our own perceptions, especially if we're not gamers, clearly. Can you take us through that, but also what you, Kinga, and your team have been proactively at as of late, especially because we've seen the press with your announcements and your initiatives on how you truly are trying to walk the talk.
So, good morning, everyone. David, as you rightly pointed out, I think there's a lot of misconception when it comes to the gambling sector. It is a heavily regulated sector, and I think there's a lot of pressure on us as the gambling regulator in Malta. We regulate the industry that currently we have more than 340 gaming companies here in Malta that employ around 15,000 people and contribute around 10% to the Maltese economy. So it is a very substantial sector, and as I said, a lot of pressure on us to make sure that it develops in a sustainable manner. I think ESG, there are lots of questions always how gambling sector can be ESG friendly, and it definitely can. There are a lot of regulation, especially gambling sector is very strong when it comes to governance and social aspects of the responsible gaming, player protection. Us as the regulator of the gambling sector, obviously there's a plethora of license conditions, of regulations that the gaming sector has to adhere to. We, as a regulator, we try to be proactive and we went a step ahead. So we've been looking into sustainability and ESG in general, and we've been exploring what the sector is doing. And we came up with the code. It's a voluntary framework that we launched a couple of weeks ago. It is a voluntary ESG code of good practice for the gambling sector that will be applying from next year. It's a reporting framework that will guide the gambling sector on what to report when it comes to ESG. As you know, CSRD is not gambling specific. So it is certain sector specific, but it's not gambling specific. So we came up with certain indicators to guide the sector to make sure that we can help smaller and medium-sized companies that are not in scope for CSRD, but they will be somewhere in the value chain of the bigger and larger companies in scope for CSRD. We want to encourage transparency. We want to make sure that the gambling companies are more accountable, that they show what they're doing, how they protect players, what they do when it comes to giving back to society. So we came up with certain KPIs, and there's a lot of good interest around this code. We'll be promoting it in the coming months, making sure that a good chunk of 340 gaming companies will apply to it.
Is this an innovative initiative for Malta, or is this a trend in gaming around the world?
I believe it's innovative not only for Malta but globally. I think we're the first gambling regulator to issue such code. There's a lot of pressure on us as well. Yes. We need to make it right. We've been asked by many of our counterparts on the code itself. Obviously, the success of these initiatives depends on its uptake, so we'll do the best we can to make sure that many companies will participate in this code.
I'm just thinking, if I was in the audience right now, one of the things that would be probably going through my mind is how do we separate initiatives like this from greenwashing, or whatever washing you want to call it, yes? So like putting in an ESG screen behind something you really want to hide. I'm asking you this question because I know this is very important to you. It is important that as we talk of ESG, we really need to ensure that we have players who, and these are the players on this panel, all of them, including yourself, who are ensuring that there is credibility, there is accountability, and there is no greenwashing, because greenwashing is by far the #1 risk to any ESG transformation in any country, in any business, anywhere around the world. So we need to address this screening out of reality. In your case, because I'm sure this is probably the question that popped in people's minds now, how are you able to reassure yourself that the KPIs you mentioned and the engagement of the 340 potential applicants to this platform would truly be serving their customers correctly, to ensure that their business remains alive and well in the next 5 to 10 years and beyond?
Well, I have to admit, greenwashing was constantly on my mind when we were working on that project. The way how we went about it, we actually conducted a materiality assessment, so very much in line with what CSRD is suggesting. So we looked into KPIs from the point of view of the regulator, what's important for us, but we also asked our licensees to rate certain KPIs. And that's how we arrived to the KPIs itself. We consulted them also with other stakeholders. It was actually one of these projects at the MGA that was really significantly consulted throughout the entire project life cycle. So we've been consulting before we developed the code. We discussed the materiality assessment with our licensees and other stakeholders. We consulted again once the code was launched, and all for that simple reason to avoid greenwashing. I think we are concentrating on really good KPIs. Many of them are our regulatory requirements to encourage licensees who might not have a lot of capacity when it comes to ESG reporting. They might not have specific staff related, concentrating on ESG and sustainability. And we also wanted to show them that there's a lot of good work that's being done already, but we had to narrow it down. Actually, the code is addressing the greenwashing in some way or form, because for the time being, without the code, every company is reporting what they feel is important for them, what they feel that they are doing good, actually. So we want to go beyond that. It's not only about the initiatives that you're very strong about, but it's about certain alignment between different companies and the sector, and making sure that we report collectively as the gambling industry on what matters.
Thank you, Kinga. That I think was absolutely useful. I think it was also reassuring to the listeners, to the followers, because it needs to be addressed. Which brings me then to maybe as a general now conversation I'd like to have on credibility, accountability, ethics. These are nice words. and I use them a lot myself, I have to admit. But, you know, when we talk of ethics, you know, we have different grades of what that means, where it comes from. Do you learn it? Is it part of you? How does it show up? How do you show up ethically in front of your audience, in front of your board, in front of your shareholders, your employees, your investors? And therefore, how is that ethical way of responsibility, of accountability, you know, doesn't mean you don't make mistakes, but at least let's be honest about matters and let's make sure we minimize risk through ethical behavior. Where does it come from? Why is it important? And what does it bring to the business? Anybody wants to take? Yes,
Can I share some of my experiences on this thing of ethics in relation to business performance? Very recently, as we all know, in March or earlier of this year, 3 financial institutions failed in the United States. 3 banks just failed in the United States. One of them, Silicon Valley Bank, one of them First Merchant American Bank, and the other, I forgot its name. But let me focus on one of them, which was the biggest one, the Silicon Valley SVB. Why did it fail? It failed primarily because there was a clear mismatch between the assets and the liabilities. So in order for the management to make additional profits and more profits, because their salaries and their remuneration packages were lined up with their performance bonuses, were lined up with the profits of the bank, they took extra risk. So there was a clear mismatch between the long-term assets being financed by short-term liabilities, by deposits. When the interest rates in the United States increased dramatically over a short period of time, in a few months, this meant that the deposits disappeared because people were looking at other alternatives. So they withdrew the liabilities, the deposits, and they ended up with very little liquidity in order to finance their assets. And this is a business model based on additional risk. The risk appetite of the bank did not contemplate this. So in my mind, management was not ethical enough in order to make sure that there was the right buffers not to end up in the situation. And we can extrapolate this also to the, I don't know, some of you recall the financial crisis in 2008 and beyond. I lived it because I was the chief officer in charge of the Treasury Department of Bank of Valletta, where we had a few thousands of millions invested abroad. And I used to get visits, honestly, from these multinational banks. And I recall one of them, and from America, and he told me, listen, I have this register of home loans in America, individual home loans. He told me, buy 50 million of them, $50 million worth of. Create a fund and sell them to your clients. And if one of them fails, I used to tell him, but I don't know this family in Alabama, if they default on the repayment, what happens? He told me it's with recourse, I will replace it. And I said, listen, I don't understand this. But he told me you can make a lot of money. You can make a lot of money because you buy them cheap and you sell them high. And this exactly was the principle of ethics. They created these, later they called them toxic assets. These assets, they wrapped them around insurance covers. They gave them a rating of AAA. So you were investing in a AAA security without knowing that the underlying asset was a mortgage in Alabama, whom you don't know whether it's going to be paid or not. And you were asked to buy these at 80, for instance, and you sell it at 100 to your client, and you make the difference. To me, that's not ethical. Okay? And the institutions that ultimately held these asset-backed securities or mortgage-backed securities or these toxic assets, ultimately, when the markets failed, the entities, the insurance companies, the banks, the funds, failed with them because the assets weren't worth it. So, and one question is the fact, but where were the board of directors? What skills and competencies had the board of directors to challenge management that they don't take these risks beyond the risk appetite of the bank? And you see, SVB failed. $200 billion bank failed earlier on this year. Why? Because their business model went beyond the risk appetite of the bank. And the directors had all the responsibility in order to do the proper oversight and to challenge what management was doing. And this is proper governance, making sure that what you set out to do, you're doing it in the right way. We had significant experiences in the financial crisis in 2009, and we had earlier on this year exactly the same. Have we learned something about it? I mean, history repeats itself, unfortunately. So we need to be very careful that when we say governance, we honestly understand exactly what we mean to say. I sit on a board of possibly one of the largest institutional investors in Europe. And when we come to invest, this is a Swedish company, and when we come to invest, one of the criteria is what are the KPIs in relation to the ESG. Okay? When this fund, this institutional investor invest, they don't invest in 10 or 20, they invest in 100, 200, 500 million. So they are meaningful investors. And we say, listen, what are the KPIs in relation to the ESG criteria? How are the financial packages of the senior executives and the CEO lined up in relation to the ESG criteria? So unless there are these clear linkages, because there is a very clear correlation, unless there are these linkages, either we don't invest or we remove the CEO or the board. It's that simple.
That's how serious it is.
But it's important because institutional investors today are giving this ESG initiative very much importance. Yeah. Because they are investing their own money, and it's not a million. They're investing a lot of millions.
So of course, what you're highlighting the fact, and this is very important for those of us following, that ESG is not really a reporting prerequisite, a reporting piece of bureaucracy. It's actually one incredibly good way of managing risk and ensuring that our business model remains thriving. Sustainably, exactly. Stephen, I know Martez wants to speak.
When discussing ESG, it's about embracing it and building the company culture around it. It trickles down from the board down to the employees, and ethical behavior at board level will resonate down the line. And this brings me to another topic, because we've been discussing already for an hour and a half at a micro level, but we haven't touched the macro level. And I think that's an important aspect as well, because central governance affects all of us. And even ethical behavior at central governance affects us all. And issues like transparency, accountability. So we look up to what's happening beyond our internal corporate circles. So I think we haven't touched upon that topic yet, David.
Actually, I was about to talk about fairness and procurement, but yeah, it's a good lead-up. Maybe just that's a good preface.
I just wanted to latch on.
Please do, because
to latch on to what Charles and Stephen touched on it as well. When we say, the integrity, the ethics of the board of directors, I think, and I believe it, that the tone is always set at the top. Yeah. And once the tone is set at the top, so out there, for the man in the street, how do they perceive good governance in an organization? I think there are three main ones. One of them is the willingness of investors to invest in your organization because you manifest good governance. Attracting talent, people who actually want to join your company because they know that you have good governance, the way you treat your employees, the way you tackle diversity, culture. As you might know, two of our major businesses are construction and hospitality. I would say 70% of our employees are non-Maltese and non-European. So unless we make these employees feel comfortable that we respect the culture, we respect their tradition, they won't, we won't retain them. So that is how then the G is manifested through vendors. They actually want to work with you. They want to build working relationships. And that is where then the value chain comes in, because it's not just you leading, by example and leading ethically, but you also have a network of vendors, of suppliers in your value chain that are actually also following. So they are all very, very much linked, I believe.
Absolutely. Kevin, I was going to ask you a question. I'm not sure what you had in mind, but let me tell you what I had in mind asking you. Then you carry on, okay?
Okay.
So as because it was leading to you actually. So we talked about ethics, we talked about doing things right, and at various levels. And I would dare say at the level of a normal citizen, at the level of a parent. I think parenting is an absolutely important stratum of responsibility. Level of business, we heard a lot about that, but also governance even at a national level, and the people who ensure that there is fairness in pretty much everything we do. Now, some years ago, you and I worked on a document in this respect, and I was wondering whether you would want to extract about the importance of that, apart from whatever else you wanted to say, Kevin.
Okay, so you're definitely referring to the Good Governance Manifesto, which we produced together pretty much, but we had a very good team, if you remember correctly, professors, and we had a good working team around it. And basically, yes, the gist of the manifesto was that ESG and good governance, because we were actually focusing on the G like we're supposed to be doing today, is a function both of government, as you said, of business and the personal. And I was surprised at the time because there was a feeling around the business community that G had to do only with government, with our political leaders. So they do and we follow. And this is what we tried to achieve with our document, in fact, because we elaborated on the role of not only big businesses, again, but also SMEs have in the good governance. Because at the end of the day, you mentioned ethics before, David. Just a brief sentence about ethics. I think if you are not ethical and you don't conduct your business in an ethical way, it will come back to bite you very soon. I think that what ESG gives you, it builds your brand, it builds your reputation, not only your consumer brand, but also your employer brand. I don't think that anybody will want to work for a company that is not well managed in terms of ethics and in terms
Do you think generally we have a culture of ethics? Do we as Maltese, we're talking about our country here. Do we appreciate enough? And where does ethics come from? I mean, I know people lecture ethics, so I'm not one of those, but I mean, where does it come from? Does it come from because you go to school and somebody gives you a couple of credits on ethics? Where does it come from? How are we going to ensure that our businesses are surrounded by board members who are ethical, our chief executives are ethical? We vote for politicians who are super ethical, yes? And we are trying to be a force for good in a transition. How does that come about?
Your ethics come from your personal values, which you then obviously transpose onto your company and onto the way you manage your company or your organization. And I'd like to think that there is a strong ethical foundation, at least in Malta. I think where we are lacking now is transposing that into the proper ESG frameworks, I think we need much more awareness about that. And I think we need to inculcate what I was just going to try and say before, the fact that even SMEs have both a responsibility in the G, but also a benefit in the G. They need to be made much more aware, and I congratulate the organizers today because this is what we are doing. Just a very small example. When we were grey listed, 3 years ago, we were judged by a number of criteria, but one of them, if I remember correctly, was our failing as a country to raise what they call UTRs and STRs, the unusual and suspicious transaction reports. And this was not just the big companies, but there were also small companies, retailers of jewelry, for example, who would receive stacks of cash in exchange of a watch or something, and they would sell it, and they would not report that there was something unusual or suspicious about it. Same in real estate, etc. We've all heard the stories, and this is the responsibility. And when there are failings at the micro level, then it starts hitting you at the national level. And maybe one thing that I just wanted to point out is that thankfully, we are now out of the grey listing, but there are other countries like Turkey, Dubai, and Croatia who are grey listed. We, as a country, do a lot of business with these countries, and we need to sensitize our SMEs that there is more due diligence, there is more risk, there is more KYC that we need to do in dealing with companies like this, because we are prone to internationalization and we're prone to risk.
Stephen, in a way, when we spoke, we talked about fairness, about procurement, about treating everybody in the same way, to allow CEOs like yourself and others to make the right decisions, the right investments, and promote the correct way of doing business. I'm going to say correct not just because it sounds right, it's because it is the obvious way to do. There should not be any other option, frankly. But if somehow we get the feeling that there could be other options, then we get confused, then we could be outmarketed, then we start being questioned, and that is where we might lose the opportunity of being a leader as a force for good in business. What's your take on that?
As I said before, it's embracing it as a culture in the company and moving away from ticking the boxes to actually value engineer those beliefs. Because what we're seeing is there's a lot of pressures from authorities in terms of financial reporting, etc., to have these policies in place, etc. But as board members, we need to ensure that those policies are actually being not only implemented, but followed rigidly across the board, and in our case, across different jurisdictions with the different challenges and the different cultures and the different acceptance levels to certain things as well, and the way we do things. So it's a challenge in itself. However, setting the right tone and the right examples is key for that to resonate down across all the organization. And we moved again away from the top level, from the governance level, which I think it's still very important because it impacts the way not only businesses perceive ethics and the way to do things, but even the individual people are affected by what they see, not only at corporate level, but also at central government level. So I think this is very, very important. And unfortunately, we're living in a society where values are being eroded, whether that is our responsibility, like you mentioned before, as leaders or even as parents. That's a very important discussion on its own right.
Maybe this brings us down to leadership. I'm not sure where we are for time. If somebody can give me an idea of how much time we're at. Leadership. So we talk about leadership at every level. I mean, as a parent, we're leaders. As business leaders, we're leaders. As in government, ministers and prime ministers are leaders. And leadership brings about responsibility, which is also inspiration to others. Which brings me maybe to two other subject matters which I would like to have touched on. That is the ability to foresee, to have a vision, to know what kind of country our children, our next generation are expecting of us, to hand over to them. Therefore, ESG is a way of ensuring that the country is sustainable because the country keeps on giving and offers quality of life even to future generations, and then brings about, therefore, the foresight of the country we want to design, not only aesthetically, but also in what it is we do and how we live in this country. So the vision and also the innovation we need to bring about to transform into this new way of doing business, this new economic prioritization, but also this new way of doing business. How much does innovation and clarity of vision of where it is the businesses are heading, because of course you're not leading countries, you're leading businesses. You're of course contributing to the way, to the destination of a country. As CEOs, you are contributing to the destination of a country. But how would your leadership transcend clarity of the destination? And what innovative tools are you already, if not planning to enact in your own businesses to be able to leave nobody behind, but also to continue to be leaders in your own businesses? I mean, Kinga, in a way, you have already attested to this. You're probably the one who has already driven this. But I was wondering whether the other businesses are thinking of this, of destination, clarity of destination, leadership, and innovation.
Can I share a quick thought, Dave, if you don't mind? One of the main concerns that I see is future leaders. Because I'm seeing a bit of apathy in the younger generation, especially getting involved not only in corporate circles, but getting involved in political circles. And we're seeing this election after election, that the younger generation is being apolitical. That is a concern in itself, because how do we attract good leaders at the top echelons of the country in the generations to come? I think that is a worrying factor. And why is that? That is the question.
Yeah, that is the question. So inspiration, I guess, is the inspiration we're getting, the disengagement. It is a Maltese problem, probably not just, but certainly is present in Malta. You are perfectly correct. Martez, please.
You mentioned innovation. I'm looking at a member of the audience, Olaf, from manufacturing, and probably
Absolutely
innovation
so.
is the absolute livelihood.
Absolutely, I attest to that.
But innovation, is it only ESG related? Because I believe our future, in every organization's future, is the power of innovating. Unless you do that, the survival rate is close to zero.
I was more referring to innovation in governance. So yeah, innovation in technology, innovation in operations, that I think we are.
But also that, I mean, again, I'm not referring to innovation in technology only, my area, but doing things in an innovative way. So innovation in processes, innovation in policies, adapting. So the power of adapting to a changing workforce, to changing methods of work. COVID saw a lot of our stuff, going and working remotely. So again, the pace with which we address this change, call it innovation, the innovative way of addressing this change, it's not just ESG. We have the opportunity to ingrain in our innovative processes better ways of doing things to safeguard the environment. But better ways of doing things, full stop, is the future of each and every organization, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Kinga, please.
Yes, if I may add, I already told you what we've been doing when it comes to ESG code. But speaking also on behalf of kind of public sector being, employee of the public sector myself. I think when it comes to innovation, we might not be seen as the most innovative very often, but that's why I think there's much more that we have to do when it comes to stakeholder engagement, when it comes to involving actually the private sector for different conversation and brainstorming different ideas of how we can address certain issues that we're facing and the private sector is facing. So for what we're doing for the gambling sector, we always have an open communication channel with our licensees, and I would love to see that. I would love to see it for other sectors as well. That's where the most innovative ideas are being discussed. That's where we make sure that our regulation and our different license conditions, they address innovative ideas and they don't limit them.
Dave, I think innovation, sometimes in our mind, the first thing crops to mind is technological innovation. I think the key word is adapting to change, adapting to the mindset of employees. The employees are changing. Their expectations are changing. As companies, we need to change as well. The consumer is changing. The needs are, now it's all about the now. I need it now. People don't know how to wait anymore. So we see it every day we work in a service industry, you work in this consumer sector as well. So these are all changes that are affecting our way of thinking, our processes. So it's a continuous battle to adapt to these external factors and also the internal factors from within the organization.
Absolutely. Kevin?
Just to carry on this, innovation in the G side of things is not easy to pinpoint because it's very abstract. But to continue on what we're saying, that ESG is actually a journey and it helps in the transformation. A couple of concrete examples which I have come across recently is, we talked about board composition, and maybe it's becoming more prevalent now to make sure that boards are composed of multi-talented, multi-dimensional people, multi-skilled. So someone mentioned cybersecurity, which today is one of the prime risks. So I know that there are boards where they are headhunting specialists on cybersecurity to make sure that the tone from the top reflects the risk that this company is facing in terms of cybersecurity. We're mentioning risk as well. I know of instances where the tone from the top on managing risk and crisis is done in a bit of a scientific way where they calculate the risk-averse coefficient of that company from extracting the beliefs and the opinions of each and every director. And that feeds into the risk appetite framework of the company itself. So these are perhaps innovative ways of doing things that shows that ESG is actually a journey and that practices evolve with time and trying to be ahead of the game all the time, because obviously otherwise you will get stuck.
Which probably takes... Charles.
Can I make
please.
A very small comment here? You can call me a visionary, okay? But I've always had this vision in my mind that I leave my country better in a better state than I found it. And obviously, you try and do as much as possible in order to leave the country you live in a better state for your siblings, for the future generation, etc. But unfortunately, when I look back, when I look today, I see that many companies, many individuals are driven by how much money they make, how much profits they make, what position they hold in life. In actual fact, I test this. When we meet a group of people, the first thing we ask, what do you do? What do you do? So we place each and every person in different strata. And to me, that is not what we should be doing. You've mentioned the phrase quality of life. I think we should be looking more towards improving our quality of life, not improving my position, not improving the balance, the balance in the bank account. That's my opinion. So I think most companies have to rethink their business model in order to give value. But value not only to themselves, shareholder value, but value to their clients in whatever sector they are. I operate today primarily in the retail. So my interest is to give value to my clients, value in terms of variety of products, value in terms of proper pricing, competitive pricing, value in terms of the right products at the right price in order to be competitive, reduce the prices if necessary, not earning a bigger and a larger margin every time, and state that I'm buying the product from abroad at a higher price, not necessarily being the case, so increasing the margin. Giving value, of course, to my employees and to my distributors and to my interested parties, because when we deal with our counterparties, we need to have a win-win situation, not I win and they lose, because that is not a relationship. It's I win, you win. Give value to the employees, because the employees, obviously, today we are multicultural, and it's the new reality of life. I mean, I have 50% of my employees, they come from they are third country nationals, with different upbringing, different culture, etc. So you need to train these people in order to be aligned to the culture of the organization. But we need to give them value. We need to treat them the same as the other employees. We need to give them the same salaries, the same bonuses, the same conditions. And last, but obviously you need to give value to the investors, to your shareholders, by returning back, by creating value in the organization, but giving back dividends, because that is a return on their investment. But last and not least, we need to give value to all stakeholders. Like I said before, we are a corporate citizen. We are a citizen of this nation. And our business comes and emanates from here. So I feel obliged, or we feel obliged, to contribute back to society. Okay? And contributing back to society in various formats. Hence the environment, we need to take care of our environment, we need to reduce plastic, we need to reduce our carbon footprint, and so on and so forth. But on the social aspect, I mean, we need to take care of those families who are in need. Not everybody in the same strata, in the same situation. There are many, many people who need assistance, and we need to give them assistance. I mean, from our profits, we need to contribute back. And to me, this is giving value to my clients, giving value to my employees, giving value to my shareholders, of course, because they are the ultimate beneficial owners, but giving value to the stakeholders in general. And the stakeholders are also important, because the stakeholders will build your brand. And when you build your brand, you become meaningful, you become important, and obviously you change. You can change others.
Absolutely. Perfect words. Kevin wanted to say something, because I wanted to latch on something what Charles said.
Yes, you asked about values and aspirations, and I will refer to another document we articulated together, which is the economic vision for Malta, where we had made it clear that there is no other way for the country to succeed unless we embrace quality. We remove the mentality that mediocrity can do. Charles was just talking about improving the environment, improving everything. Even if we just talk about tourism, there has to be a tone from the top that the country is going for quality. And we need the governance structures to ensure that we walk the talk. We don't just say we want quality, but we actually implement quality in everything we do. in our environment, in the people, and the service that we provide. Because like that, we climb the value chain. And if we climb the value chain, we're obviously all win-win-win. And
this is very relevant. I mean, I work in the tourism sector, and I always give this example. It's used as having a 5-star destination like the Valletta waterfront and great facilities. But then when they step on this street, they're being harassed by the taxi drivers, by the carrozzini. Then they have to walk to Valletta. There's broken pavement, lack of lighting, lack of cleanliness. So that's why it's important that there's good coordination between all the stakeholders. And we're seeing it in our day life, for example, with the traffic situation, where it seems like one department doesn't coordinate with the other, or one local council doesn't coordinate with the other. We're a small country, it's a gridlock everywhere, and sometimes the decisions that you see, I mean, I live in Melia. Yesterday morning, the road down to Manicata is closed, the road down to Shemshi and then you have only one outlet from Melia. So it's lack of coordination, and this is all down to governance and lack of coordination.
So if I may, of course, this panel does not have any government representative, so I would have loved for that to have happened. I would have asked that straight question. However, if we want to be more tangible, because I'm just imagining myself being in the audience and listening to this conversation, and at one point I start saying, okay, how do I change words into measurable actions, KPIs? How do I do that? How do I, as Charles was saying, how do I change this aspiration into a business strategy? How do I include ESG in the business strategy with measurable KPIs? Because it makes sense for business. It is not quite a charity action. This is a sustainability requirement that brings about value through market share, retention, if not growth, through increased profits, and therefore a win-win-win, as Charles was saying. But unless, and this is maybe what I'd like everybody to try in this room and following this panel discussion, to try to do, is in your own little space, and I'm going to ask this question to the panel, in your little space, try and find ways of how to personalize the ambition of improving governance and ethics, because it makes sense for your business, but through measurable actions, not just words. So that's why it needs to sit with a business strategy and needs to be measured like a KPI, like GDP at a national level or bottom line contribution in an economic level. Audit committees would audit and would meet CEOs and their executive teams, typically used to measure pure budget reliance, the ability to achieve budget expectations. And budget is pure euros. When actually audits is about risk, and today we're talking about risk in the level of course, dividends, and the environmental risk, the social risk, and the governance risk. Trying to focus on governance as well, because we're trying to specialize today on that area. Would there be any suggestion or action you would have taken already in measuring the ability to retain and maintain and grow the governance aspects within your business as a strategy?
I like to be controversial, but it's not that easy, and it's not a question of just KPIs. I think the key question here is accountability. If I don't perform as CEO or COO on a consistent basis, I'm fired. As simple as that. So it's a question of accountability. Okay, so it's useless setting targets and then the Maltese mentality creeps in, uwija. This is the Maltese mentality. Kollox uwija, ftit ma ħaniħx, uwija, għax raħmi ċemmek, uwija. And that is something that kills me in Maltese society, which I call it the uwija mentality, which is unfortunate.
Any other takers?
I was going to refer to the gatekeeping aspect of the ESG. So the portion of our companies in Malta which internationalize, for example, or who, even an SME. If an SME sells to one of the manufacturing plants in Malta that supplies multinationals with chips or with car components or whatever, as the keynote speaker this morning told us, there is a whole value chain audit trail. And you can't slip up, because they will go back the value chain until they find the kink, and because reputations are at stake, same with outsourcing. When a company outsources, it outsources also its governance, its reputation. So it has to drill right down to the last supplier. I was at one of the biggest manufacturing companies about 5 years ago, and they were having an audit because there was some kind of suspicion that somewhere along the trail there was child slavery actually was involved. Obviously, it was not in Malta. But even this company, which was supplying the multinational company, then in turn had to go dig deeper into the value chain before it to make sure that there was no foul play. But also, banks are going to become gatekeepers eventually, because no longer will you be able to go to obtain a facility and be judged purely on financial criteria, like your security that you can place. But they will, banks, with the new directive that was being explained this morning, and in fact there is one of the 12 standards which is on corporate governance, one of the 12. It is going to make sure that banks are covered in terms of their risk of conflict of interest, accountability, and all the criteria which this new standard is going to bring about. Obviously nothing new, but the scopes keep changing and certain definitions keep changing, but our businesses are going to face more problems if they're not going to embrace ESG, because they're going to come to a gate and they're going to find it closed. So perhaps the more of our companies which are internationalizing, and the more of our companies which deal with banks and other gatekeepers, then this OIA perhaps attitude will start to be eradicated, because we're going to have to embrace ESG and G in particular as a necessity rather than as a choice.
Kevin, very, very good point. On that score, I recognize through my little experience that the organizations in this country, in Malta, that have strong or relatively strong exposure to international business and therefore conversations about risk are very aware of this need to transit and actually are transitioning, clearly. Not because MFSA is asking them to report anything, it's because that's what you need to do to retain the business, and that's what you need to do to grow the business. So it's not really, again, a charitable action, it's really a business action, by business being a force for good, which is a good thing anyway, so it's a no-brainer in a way. However, of course, the difficulty lies, and thanks to PKF and Times of Malta, again this morning, we are trying to mainstream this conversation, not to allow it to be academic, but to sensitize or to allow leaders such as yourself, who of course are convinced leaders here, who know what they're doing and do it for a purpose, which is also another important word we need to emphasize. They realize that the supply chain, and therefore the rest of the Maltese economy, needs to transition as well. And that supply chain is typically the small to medium enterprises, the micro enterprises, the family businesses, of course, with a very strong governance structures. Banks, I guess, also have a very important role to play, not only because they have a back-end regulator who's breathing down their neck, but also because they're able to discriminate through their own products, ability to get people to understand that it's better doing it this way and another way, and it becomes easier, even economically, to change tact or to have different KPIs.
But at the same time, David, perhaps banks are also facilitating, because banks are sometimes put in a bit of a bad light, but there is a whole new suite of products which banks are offering today for green investments, for example, to help in the transition, because obviously SMEs can't wake up in the morning and say, listen, I'm going to transform my business and I'm going to make it greener and I'm going to up the quality and this and that. And I think that banks are living up to their responsibilities and helping out with. Last week, I think they announced that the green, one of the green loan allocations was fully taken up in Malta, which is very, very good news. So I mean, we're getting there. I think we need to be encouraged with the signs that we're seeing around us.
I think consumers are clearly passing on a very strong message. The fact that banks today are, I have understood, correct me if I'm wrong, but some banks are actually cutting short on their marketing spend on green products because there's an oversubscription of need and very little inventory to offer. So actually our problem is in the inventory side, not in the customer transformation side. I think I've understood, correct me if I am wrong. It was good news, but of course we need to act on taking action to provide collateral. Do you agree?
I fully agree that banks have a very important role to play. But they can't be on their own. Let's be very clear. The bank has a very important role to play. They can, for a better word, discriminate between one client and another in terms of, particularly in terms of pricing and in terms of conditions of the loan. However, it is not a question of sanctioning the loan or sanctioning the facility. It has to be an ongoing thing, because when you take a loan, okay, it's a zero interest rate loan because it's a green loan and so on and so forth. But then you have to ensure that the bank will continue to follow up and make sure that what you've promised to do, you're doing it in the respective reviews, because it's easy to tell them, yes, I have this program, I will do this and I will do that. But ultimately, have you done it? Yeah. You know? Banks, it's true, have a very important role to play, but so do investors. You know, I honestly believe that this is it has to be a concerted effort, David. You can't have one party responsible to make sure that we change the world. It has to be everybody does his part. Like I said earlier on, I sit on a board that we are a large institutional investor in Europe. Before we invest in an entity, in a company, we make sure that they have the necessary governance in place, the directors have the necessary skills and competencies, because ultimately that brings about the sustainability aspect that we were discussing, and even more so, the remuneration of both the directors and the senior management and the CEO. They have to be aligned. They have to be aligned, because if the board greenwashes the ESG initiatives, and management, obviously, once the board doesn't give the guidance, and management will go and do his thing and aim for making additional more profits, and there's no linkage with the ESG initiatives, then the remuneration package should be reflected accordingly, because especially many multinationals, the remuneration packages are based on performance. They are performance-based. That is why the ECB now has intervened, and they said, listen, the performance element of the remuneration package has to be controlled. Not like before, it was open for everything, and everybody was, it was free for all, so the salary was X, and the bonuses were X5, you know? So I think this has to be a concerted effort, but the banks, yes, I agree that they play a very, very critical role, very critical role.
Okay, what clearly very wise words, Charles. I'm not sure whether this is a segue to also suggest that our political leaders should be remunerated commensurate with the responsibility.
It's about time.
Because actually, when you think about it, we all smile at it and say, it's ridiculously low, that's what we say. But actually, that is tantamount to risk at the governance level, yes? So maybe if there's one take-home to make to people, not us, in this case, not in this room, would be that. It's a good point. Maybe, is there anything else on the subject? Because I was thinking, it's maybe been rather boring for you to listen to us for so long. Maybe anticipate a little bit the conversation, the Q&A or the suggestions that you would have on the subject. Back to the floor. I think we have a roving mic, I am hoping anywhere, somewhere. If not, you can take mine. Okay, and then after that, maybe we'll come back to some concluding remarks by the panelists. You can use. Yeah, okay. Let's do that. And share some mics. Okay.
Yeah.
Please.
Okay.
Anybody? Any takers? In addition, contrast, yes, please.
Okay.
Mr. Manjon.
Mr. Manjon.
Hello, thank you. Yes, I must congratulate the team, the panel, for being so candid with us and honest with their experiences. Some experiences, of course, are unique in their own capacity, and it is fora like this that you get to know about these expressions. I'm very much intrigued by what Charles told us about banks and their responsibility towards ESG. For example, I got this idea of running 3, shall we say, minor conferences on ESG since April of this year. We were very lucky to have 2 ministers, one coming for the E of the environment, and we had another minister, a different one, for the E or S of ESG. We also invited a minister today, and I'd like to inform the audience that he sent his apologies that he couldn't attend. And I understand that as a moderator, you told me that he actually talked to you 2 days ago and exchanged views of coming. However, there is so much to talk about in ESG, and I come to my question quickly, which I don't usually do. I keep on circling and not hitting. But believe me, if we talk about ESG, especially on the G, which is the transitional journey that we all have to take, and if we don't, as a small island, we will lose out for other countries, which are. But this is on the commerce basis, on whether you are in retail, whether you're in banking, you're on the cruise liners, whether you are in the gambling arena, or whether you are in the regulator point of view. What happens if the tone at the top does not go through the regulations of governance? If, for example, company A is so proud that it has given value to its employees, given value to the shareholders, given value to the stakeholders, and it's seeing that slowly, it is following and being compliant with ESG. However, when it knocks the door somewhere else, I don't want to appear political, the situation changes. There is a blur, and you find that some ministers, for example, are very poorly paid by regulations of industry, but occasionally they may get a bag of potatoes for Christmas on the side, which helps in the situation, but does not help the governance level. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for that very insightful observation.
We have a sad reality where the CEOs of authorities are being paid more than the minister who is responsible from all the authorities.
This, of course, doesn't augur well for fairness.
We have a question.
Yes, please.
Hello. Thank you very much for the presentation. My name is Anne-Marie. Some of you know me. I have a comment and 3 questions. One of them is the comment, really. We talked a lot about corporate governance and not about public governance per se. It could be maybe, that could be something that we could plan going forward, because it would be interesting to see what public governance is all about in terms of accountability, transparency, fairness, responsibility, and impartiality. My questions. Charles, you made reference to this, but I'm going to probe further. We're talking here about the view in view of the G in ESG. So how would your strategy be aligned with stakeholders now, interests and expectations? In other words, if they're not aligned, how will you get there? That's the first question. The second is, again, keeping the G in the ESG. What do you think, anybody, I'm just asking the panel, what new competencies, not the competencies that there are today, new competencies in view of ESG, competencies and training for the existing board members, committee members would be needed? And the third, and it was mentioned as well vis-à-vis tone and also from the panel and from the audience, what is the tone that you are setting at the top, and how do we assess whether this tone is generating the desired outcomes?
Brilliant questions. Thank you very much for that. Can I have a show of hands to understand how many queries there will be so that we can manage time appropriately? I can see 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, good. So maybe let's answer this question. Yeah, and then we'll go, depending on the complexity of the questions, I guess we'll go the rest. Charles, the first question I think was addressed straight to you, so that was easy.
Thank you, Anne-Marie.
Okay.
Very briefly. For my sins, some years back, I was the chairperson of a government entity. And I found a situation where there was a complete difference when you compare a government entity with a private entity. In terms of mentality, in terms of culture, in terms of accountability, etc. We tried as much as possible to make sure that this government entity creates its own funding and does the necessary project with the funding that it manages to raise. Before I went there, the situation was, yes, we will do the projects, but then go to the treasury and ask for more money, more and more and more and more money. And I said, listen, this can't happen, because if you're in a private entity, there's a competition for funds, for capital. Whoever has the right project will get the funding. Whoever has the right project will get the necessary resources. So I think that is the difference I found in the two entities. Now, how do we align ourselves with stakeholders, with all stakeholders? Like I said, to me, the stakeholders are four. The clients, and they are critically important because it's your bread and butter. So you need to make sure that you give value to the clients by giving them the right products, you don't overcharge them, and so on and so forth. You be competitive. You are very customer-centric because the level of service is critically important, and building your brand. Obviously, like I said, the employees and the shareholders, but in my mind, which is very close to my heart, is the community in general. I think the community in general is not very easy to understand exactly what their needs and requirements are. But let me give you an example, Anne-Marie. Let me give you an example. And it is not coming from me. I've experienced it some years back. You know, I represent a retail group today. I represent a retail group that offers food, offers clothing, offers retail space, okay? The ultimate beneficial owner said, listen, rather than we contribute to society, to these NGOs, rather than we contribute and give them donations once a year, okay? We give them the tree, not the fruit. So by giving them the tree, they will cut the fruit every single year. So he contributed part of his own shareholding in the group to these NGOs. Potino Cares, to Malta Trust Foundation, and so on and so forth. So today they are shareholders in our business. They receive the dividend twice a year in order for the dividends to be able to do what the operation is, you know, to make sure that they have a necessary funding to do what they need to do. So this is helping stakeholders. This is helping the community in general, rather than we contribute individually every year. We give them shareholding in the business, and it's to me it's very altruistic. I remember, if you allow me, I will share this experience with you. Paul had contributed to about 250,000 shares to the Little Sisters of the Poor, okay? And he told me, go and explain it to them. And I went to the sisters, and I knocked on the door, and they opened, and I explained that we were going to donate to them 250,000 shares, worth so much, at the time they were €2, so they were worth 500,000, and they will receive. And this Badessa, I don't know what they call it in English, the head of the sisters, whatever, she was crying. She went to the chapel praying, and she left me over there for over half an hour. I said, where did you go? She said, I couldn't understand. This is a miracle. I couldn't understand. I explained it to her. And this is a true experience. And this is, when you have a culture within an organization that has values. My colleagues, I think Kevin and Steve mentioned values. When you have values, you know, you managed to do these things. And we'll probably build your own brand, and you'll probably have a more sustainable business. And that is how I think that we need to take care and align our business model with the expectation of the stakeholders.
To address one of the questions, you mentioned how boards are kept abreast of what's happening, etc. In our case, of course, being a London-listed entity as the group, we do have a compliance officer, and of course, we are kept abreast of what's happening. And I think a critical aspect, though, and then the way it trickles down, even though we are a big organization, we're operating in 30 ports, each of the ports has a small number of key individuals. So staff retention is key to what we do. There's the knowledge acquired. We invest in the people for them to arrive at a certain level. So a good remuneration committee and good remuneration policy is key to staff retention, to keeping knowledge. And I'm a firm believer, I remember this quote, that knowledge is the only asset that appreciates with use. So the more we share knowledge like we're doing today, the more we get back. And in the service industry, staff retention is key. So that's very important. And well, that's my message, really.
Because I believe one of the questions, I wrote some notes because I forget. One of the questions was about competencies and training on ESG. I think that, first of all, there are a number of very good training service providers out there that actually offer training to different levels, whether it's board management, and then you can link in that formal training to what initiatives you have in the organization. But I believe that the same way that with other areas, AML and cybersecurity, we're running training in the organization. ESG should become a regular schedule, annual, at least annual, for the entire organization. That's the only way where you build awareness, in my opinion.
Yes, in addition, Kevin, please.
Maybe just to add on to this, because I think some of the competences are pretty standard on our boards, but perhaps in the journey towards ESG, I think the training and the new competences, which are definitely going to be really up there in terms of need, are analytical skills, because ESG is all about measurement of impact on the wider stakeholders and on the wider community. So the director has to understand the impact, first of all, the impact, the desired impact, and the actual impact, which is then needs to be measured, analyzed, and challenged. And I would say another competence would be transformational skills and change management, because all this requires us to stick to our objectives, but perhaps change the way we do things in order to ensure that we are doing them properly, with integrity, diligently, transparently, etc.
Yep. And there's a lot happening. I can attest to this. So a number of mature boards, I'll define it that way, mature boards who are constantly thinking of risk and management of that risk and keeping the executives accountable. That starts with desensitization of the board members themselves, potentially also a shift, as I think was mentioned before, to ensure that there is cross-competence and cross-representation, not only of gender, but also of the minorities or the consumer base, to ensure that we understand what we're dealing with, we understand risk, and risk not only driven by the economic risk, purchasing, revenue, profit, bottom line, efficiency, and all that, but also the environmental, social, and government risk and governance risk. And I know quite a few people who are self-training by the ones I know is certainly signing up to one of these online courses in the UK typically and so on. University of Malta has started a rather good, I think, ESG course with FEMA. Seems to have quite a number of subscribers, people looking up to that as well. But ultimately, it's not really about what ESG is, it's how it affects you, how do you personalize it, and dimension the risk on the basis of ESG. Because when you do that, then it becomes tangible, it becomes real, valuable, useful, and therefore, impactful, because after all, that's where we are. But however, we are in a position we are still transitioning. When it comes to small to medium enterprises, that's harder, especially when one starts to talk about NEDs, non-family, typically, non-executive directors, but non-family or non-core business. That's a struggle. There are some people doing some really good work in that space, sensitizing family businesses to understand the importance of reducing risk by bringing in externals, but then the competence is also driving ESG. So there's a lot happening. It's a transformation. I mean, the Malta ESG Alliance was born exactly for the purposes of bringing transformation across the whole economic landscape, and not only for the big boys and girls in the industry, but also for the small to medium enterprises, even the micro. If we do that, it's good for the big organizations. It's also good for the smaller ones transitioning, but also for the national economy and therefore the wellness of the society we live in. That's really the task at hand. Anthony.
Good morning to all. Anthony Sammoud, a commercial lawyer by profession, with the totality of my assisted being family businesses. First of all, I join the others in congratulating the panel for being so candid and being so courageous and touching certain arguments. My intervention is actually targeted at fueling the discussion rather than being a question. I feel that in the past years, family businesses have got very influenced by two very dangerous and unfounded mantras. The first one is that it is just the way it is in Malta, so it is okay if you call somebody, it's okay if you try to get what you do not deserve, because it's just the way it is. And the second very dangerous mantra is, it is okay if you are just following orders. And that is another very dangerous thing, which we are feeling, that is unfortunately influencing very much the private sector, that if it is okay for people to be very unethical just because they're following orders, why shouldn't be able to me do it myself as well in my little tiny world. It's just a way of fueling the discussion. Thank you very much to everyone.
Thank you, Anthony. Conscious of time, I think there was those. Yes, here we are. We'll come back to those very two mantras. Thank you for that, Anthony.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Greta Schwib, Salvo-Grima Group. We are internationalized. We operate in 7 countries. We're medium-sized. We have 233 staff. Our key challenge is now, obviously, we are under pressure from our clients, from the banks, to make sure we are reporting in line with, at the moment, we are reporting in line with GRI standards, but now we also fall under the requirements for the CSRD. What I am trying to work out is how to ensure that ESG does not become a tax on us, because obviously it is an imposition and it's something we need to comply with, and to make sure that it filters down across the entire organization to obviously help us improve our structures. So my question is, how do other companies structure the ESG compliance? I'm trying to get ideas. I liked Martez's suggestion that we could introduce ESG training at induction stage, which is very, very interesting. But also I was wondering how other companies are addressing this in a structural way, whether we maybe should have, for example, the remuneration committee mentioned by Stephen is very interesting. What other structures should we put in place to make sure we are complying, but not just tick boxing, that we are getting some benefit out of it rather than feeling it's an imposition from outside? Thank you.
Super question. Thank you for that. Okay, so 2 suggestions by Anthony and another question here, a very, very pertinent question to try and answer, because if we manage that, I think we would have done a great job today. Yeah. So, any takers? Yes, please. Kinga.
I can start actually with your question. I will speak on behalf of Public Authority, but we are also in a similar situation. We are just at the very beginning of our journey when it comes to ESG. Obviously, we are not in scope when it comes to CSRD, so the situation is slightly different. And there are no requirements as such for the public entities, unfortunately. Hopefully, it is going to change in the next year or so. But we are also at the beginning of the ESG journey. So what we did, we started with establishing our own ESG committee, and this committee is obviously looking into materiality assessment, what is important for us. We are discussing, obviously, it very closely with the board, and that leads me to another question from the first question that we got about the competencies of the board. It's very important that there's much more awareness within the organization what the ESG is about. It's not only about the environment, it's not only about companies organizing CSR activities, it's not only about giving funds to different charities. It's a very important aspect, but it's not only about that. Obviously, you need to align whatever you do with CSRD as much as possible, but it should be company specific.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Kevin.
Well, there's no shortcut,
yes,
really, right?
Sorry.
Sorry.
Kevin? Okay, it's okay, sorry.
There's a lot to be done. I mean, it's not a shortcut. I think family businesses must, and I emphasize the word must, embrace the idea of having independent directors on the board with relative experiences. I think that will add value to the company. Setting up committees like the Remuneration, Nominations Committee, Audit and Risk Committee, these are becoming more and more relevant even if you're not a private listed entity. And getting the right expertise on board is key. And I think many family businesses are moving away from the traditional way. I mean, Charles is an example as well. He's in a family business, even though it's a listed entity. I worked for the same company 25 years ago, so I can see the change. So that's, Anthony is smiling as well, because I was in the same group. So you know, it's a transformative change, and it's a cultural change at the end of the day. And I think being aware of it is the first crucial step. And once you're aware of these requirements, then implementing it, getting the right support is key to that. And embracing it as a core corporate value, as a core cultural value.
Kevin?
Yes. To answer the question in a bit of a different way, I think we mustn't think of ESG in terms of taxing or compliance. I think ESG is a culture. I think it's the willingness for a company to embrace ESG and to make sure that it balances out the interests of its own interests and that of the outside world. So perhaps if you could think of the benefits which we've been highlighting for the past couple of hours that the company is seeking from getting ESG, could be to do with the brand or to do with any other benefit, and then reverse engineer that and see how the most efficient way of achieving that benefit, either through committees, through policies and procedures, etc. But certainly doing things the right way is, in the long run, a very, cost-benefit analysis is very positive on that thing.
Thank you. If I may, one last comment, because we're going through the same journey that you're going through. So, as you might know, we are among the first, not just AX Group, but we're among the first that need to report, that fall under the CSRD because of our size and the fact that we're a public entity. So the CSRD itself, we're seeing it as a journey. So I can assure you we're running the materiality assessment at the moment. The first report is absolutely not going to be perfect. There's going to be a lot of areas. First of all, there's a lot to report on. There's going to be a lot of areas where we know from now that we need to improve on. But that's the whole concept behind this reporting directive. That year on year, because you're measuring, year on year, you're showing improvement. So take it in that spirit, okay? Don't try, think big, because you know that you need to get to a point where you reduce carbon footprint, you improve, a lot of things. But then act small, start addressing small things that will get you there on the, on the journey.
Yeah. So if I may, I think this matter of materiality is absolutely important. In my little experience, as rightfully already mentioned, this matter of, once somebody asked us to wear seat belts or else, you remember that? And we all complained that seat belts were possibly unnecessary, why we're wearing them, until some of us started to get fined a couple of times, 100 euros, whatever it was, can't remember. And then we started wearing seatbelts. Today we don't even think about it. Actually today we are convinced wearing a seatbelt is a super safe thing, and you would look roughly at somebody who does not. I mean, even if you sit at the back of a taxi today, a taxi driver will say, can you please put on your seatbelt? Which is brilliant. Same thing with ESG. The materiality, if you like, of wearing a seatbelt is now understood. It was looked as a tax before, and now no more. However, when we look at the benefits of risk assessment and the risk, therefore, address through actions, through business strategy, then it becomes really valuable. Maybe one pointer I would make here is one thing I fear about is that I see a number of advisors in Malta who are, of course, in the advisory or in the audit realm, okay? Certainly not PKF, apparently, because PKF are here this morning and actually organizing an event like this, whose entry point into suggesting that ESG is a good metric is simply because we have a deadline, 2027, 2028, whenever it is, and you need to report, and it's big, it's costly, you need to do this, lots of data, and people groan, moan, it costs you so many thousands of euros, and that's the value, which is negative. It's actually negative. The entry point is absolutely wrong. So the way we see it, certainly at an alliance point of view, is this not to do with advisors, not to do with auditors, this is to do with the CEO and the C-suite of the CEO who get it, understand the risk, get the need for transitioning, of course, get a board to support it, maybe get a board to drive it, potentially, then transcend across, customers and everybody else. You understand risk and therefore value. Then when the audit comes, when the reporting comes, it's actually an enjoyable experience because you are celebrating the fruit of the timely analysis of risk and the timely action to that risk to be able to show up and say, you know what, I've discovered it early enough, I've taken this on board, I've taken action, I am making sure that your investment in my company is actually not short-lived, and everything is then positive. It's like health and safety. Health and safety, in a way, is another measure of, well, S for sure, but also G. Yeah? And health and safety, there's a no-brainer to this. Some people still look at health and safety as a cost. We all know the consequences of when you look at health and safety as a cost. The matter is really one in which one would avoid accidents at any place of work, not just construction, so not just it's any place of work, to the benefit of the business. It's the same mantra. So maybe one other thing I would suggest in this meeting today is that all of us here have areas of influence and areas of responsibility. Let us try, and also those following us on Facebook Live, is to try and ensure that our leaders in any business, in any organization, in any family, are able to see the value to this, the materiality, of course, because not everybody's journey is the same, and therefore do not resist, if you like, the need to report one day, but actually take immediate action to bring about the positive change that is good for everybody, but also good for the organization one forms part of. Okay, I realize I've been noticed that we're out of time. Any hot take-homes after today? Maybe just one or two sentences. Anybody wants to go before we leave the floor to Mr. Manjon? There is another question? Is there?
We did have one more, if there's time.
Okay, yeah, please, Matthew, please. Yes, of course.
Hi, thank you.
I didn't see you.
Just a brief point. Hi, Dave.
Apologies.
And the panel has been very interesting, the whole discussion. But mine is not so much a question, and really to keep it brief, but more to ponder, and maybe some of the panelists could sort of give their thoughts. But we started with the word sustainability, and that remains key. And I think sustainability today is different from the past, which was purely from a commercial side, naturally about that bottom line and keeping the business sustainable into the future. But today, that word sustainability has to do with a much wider sector, externally as well. And I think one of the key challenges, especially at board level, we mentioned the tone at the top, which sets the mood in the middle, and goes down to the buzz at the bottom. It's sort of the mindset about changing that profit element to now think of it as, it's about purpose beyond profit. And how do we get that at board level and companies to start understanding that the mindset, which has to align with their company vision, mission, values, to really make a success of this. And ultimately, I think possibly ESG in the future should have a value and a balance sheet for a company's efforts, Good. Thank you. Just thoughts.
Okay, I'm going to try and attempt and ask the panel to answer your question in an orchestral way. So one sentence after the other, and maybe bring back a whole answer to that, making it as short as possible. Okay, one or two sentences, and it doesn't have to be comprehensive, and eventually we'll try and close.
No, what I would say is that I think there should be a concerted effort and a concerted national effort to utilize ESG in all its components for us to climb up the value chain, to climb up the ladder and perhaps transform our economic model into something which is win-win and future-proof for the years to come.
Yes. Good. Thank you. Martez?
I will say only two words, business value. Because unless we look at this from a business value perspective, like any other initiative ultimately, I don't think it will take off. And the value could be, staff retention, it could be elevating your brand name, brand image, saving the planet, but business value.
Business value, good. Kinga?
I think the key word also is collaboration. I think events like today, they help us actually to discuss the matter in more detail, but there should be more collaboration between all of us, sharing of knowledge, and I think that would help everyone in that space.
Brilliant. Stephen?
Patience.
What,
That the
sorry?
patience.
Patience.
That the
Okay.
real tangible value will come over time.
Assolutament. Good one, good one. Thank you, Charles.
History has proved that there's a very clear correlation between good governance and value creation. The better the governance, the more value the company creates.
Brilliant. Okay. So we'll try to orchestrate an answer for you, Matthew, in one way or another. Okay, so yeah, it's okay, it's okay. Gonna make some time. So with that, first of all, I wish to thank Times of Malta and PKF for this opportunity given to us to spend some time with you, giving you some insights. I cannot, in any event that I'm in with ESG, not allow us also to talk about and prioritize future generations. This is really about ensuring, as Charles at one stage said, you would like to have a country, a business, a family, an organization, which is better when we leave to when we started off or entered. And that is, in my mind, really, really serious, a really serious matter. So engaging with future generations, engaging with children's aspirations, engaging with the quality of life and the economy that they deserve is really ensuring that what it is we do today is good for shareholders today because it addresses the expectations, the aspirations of generations to come. If we are able to think more as parents and less as whatever, leaders or CEOs or what have yous, then maybe we stand a chance of getting our ESG metrics right. I keep repeating this to myself and it resonates. So I wanted to share this with you. And maybe on a final note, maybe a little bit of a challenge. This is the fourth conference on ESG organized by Times of Malta, PKF. I feel there is a fifth that we need to address. And that should be one in which future generations have a say in this ESG journey. I honestly think that the Malta ESG Alliance has what today is called the Consultative Council of Future Generations. And you know what that did? What this council does? It's a group of 20 children between the ages of 11 and 13, emanating from state schools, church schools, independent schools, 20. And you know what their role is, what their KPI is? To keep CEOs uncomfortably accountable. Requested by CEOs, mind you. So the accountability is quite obvious. The uncomfortable nature of that accountability is quite important and serious. And maybe next step is to have an opportunity where the children are maybe front seated, and we're simply listening in the back and taking them a bit seriously. So that I think would enable tangibility and accountability and responsibility and ethics and governance, therefore, and I think we said, by being a bit more respectful to the aspirations of future generations, as I've explained. So with that, thank you, Kevin, Martez, Kinga, Stephen, Charles. Thank you, Times of Malta. Thank you, PKF, for giving us this opportunity. And I think I now need to pass on the baton to James. Yeah?
Yes,
Thank
and
you.
I believe from PKF, George Manjone. I would just like to say a quick word of thanks at the podium. Thank you.
Are you sure it works? Hello, hello? Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, almost afternoon here. I must very much thank the panel for giving us the best they could and from their personal experience. PKF has been organizing events like this. Hopefully, as I said in the first event, we will have 500 attending because the message has to go across. It has to reach. But then Times of Malta have the golden quill to write articles, hopefully next week, and the message will pass through. My general comments for those of you who are attending, and for which we thank you very much, for supporting Times of Malta and ourselves is, I agree, it's a journey. However, if you have ESG explained to you by technical people and also a regulator and also the chairman of a government-appointed alliance, which is also spearheading this. And now we know that even children are helping, which is a good idea. However, allow me to say, and I don't want to sound political or controversial, that two trains seems to be running without actually ever meeting, which is the heavy expense that the commerce and the industry, okay? Now, as you know, we have about 5 pillars of industry in Malta. We have about 3 represented here. We have the retail, there is the tourism and cruise liner, there's the gambling, which I was one of the pioneers to promote in Malta. I was told at that time, gambling is a stigma in Malta and Maltese. So, George, if you write about gambling on the Monday, leave another month to write another article about it in Times of Malta, for example. Anyway, now it's grown, 15,000 employees, good salaries, etc. Then we have a regulator on maritime, and of course, the top constructor and hospitality, AX Holdings. We invited more, of course, speakers, and we invited more to attend. One sting in my heart is that the government over the years has its own companies. I don't want to mention them now because everybody knows and see them. Where are they? Where are the CEOs of these companies to attend and hear the very informative advice that the exquisite panel we have here? They're not here. So we have 2 trains. One train, which is building itself, include the SMEs and family companies, which for them is an expense. And then we have the government, which employs 51,000, okay? So not a small operator, but quite a substantial operator. And I'm not criticizing that it employs so many. But the trains have to meet, have to converge. It's no good going in and meet a minister who, incidentally, we have invited here, and at the last minute, unfortunately, he could not make it, okay? And we are addressing certain questions to ourselves, which some of them cannot be answered, because the ministerial or his representative, I mean, we don't perhaps not find any difficulty to talk to his subordinates. His prime sec, for example. How many prime secs do we have in the audience? I think if you pop up by your fingers, we don't find more than 2, if any. I think there is nobody. Another aspect which was not a charge in this event is everybody is clapping for ESG. We've got the Alliance here, okay, some of the top companies, which is good. We have a number of firms like us who, from the little resources, organize companies like this, but who's going to pay? Who's going to pay for improving the quality of our governance? Who's going to pay for improving the quality of our environment? Who are the regulators? How are the regulators? The minister, one of his important departments and section is planning authority. Who's going to improve if there needs improvement? Well, you have the answer. Another aspect, we have been told by a very erudite member of the panel about the banks having to help and having to organize. Isn't there banks with their surplus profits since the increase of the rates from ESG, putting aside some of the profits to help depositors, to help loan takers, to organize their KPIs, to send for them? But the answer is in the air. We have been told, and I agree, change will always be resisted. There is no change. In the first industrial revolution, when horses were replaced by cars, okay, anybody driving a car had to have a person with a red flag in front of him. Okay? This time, I don't know how many red flags we will have for companies running ESG, but there will be, obviously, some conferences. we think that the attitude of the commercial operators is positive. We sent invitations to over 2,500 LinkedIn operators here and names, and we found their encouraging response from them. Okay, some couldn't make it, but others attended. Does the country, not the operators now, not the commercial, not the educational sector, but does government need to go for higher transparency? I don't need to answer that. Is waiting for NAO to do their researches on areas in governance investigation taking 3 to 4 years, because it's a big task, to not serving its purpose? These are thoughts for you to consider. Since I was given only another minute to close up, I have about 6 points, which I have to 0 minutes now, they told me, because I think there is either lunch coming through. I think the very important points, which I can't emphasize more than the panel has so erudite in their presentation given, but I would like to at least conclude why operators like PKF, who will get no lunch if I keep on nabbling, endeavor to get you, to invite you to come here, and Times of Malta together, to listen to the G of governance. I think the answer is that although we are punching beyond our weight, we feel that the government will get the message eventually. The minister who had to attend here and for some valid reason could not be with us and answer some of the questions that the panel has put forward, we hope that the next and the 5th conference on ESG, hopefully with the concurrence of David Schwierep, will be a higher success. Thank you very much, and thank you for coming.
Okay, thank you, George, thank you. That does bring us to the end of this morning's event. Thank you all so much for coming, and to those of you watching at home as well. I'm going to make this super short because I'm sure you all want to go. But we don't have lunch, but we do still have refreshments at the back. Please do avail yourself of those. Before we go, I'd just like you to join me in thanking the panel once more for their expertise, and to David as well. Thank you, everybody.